It's the worst of the CBC for October 15th, 2019, the show where I watch the CBC so you don't have to. And it's getting very interesting. As we get closer and closer to the Canadian election, we get further and further away from stories that should matter to the Canadian election. I've been on record saying the amount of coverage given to the SNC-Lavalin affair is laughable in the extreme, and is it compromises democracy irreparably. But that's not even going to be the biggest mission of the day. So the worst covered story, the worst covered. They spent a lot of time talking about this coalition talk that we'll get back to in a minute. Well, the worst covered story of the day is definitely Trump and the Syrian stuff and just the way they covered it. The verbiage used explicitly at one point on the CBC was, even this is United Democrats and Republicans against him in some sense. And of course, some Republicans will be opposed to what Trump did because it's the exact same thing Obama did, and they're being morally and logically consistent here. And they can't come out and say that the Republicans are actually being morally consistent here. And you see this in the rhetoric they use, that even they said Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat, and Lindsey Graham, a Trump loyalist, right? He's not a Republican. He's now a Trump loyalist. But Lindsey Graham, a Trump loyalist, is going against Trump on his Syrian withdrawal, which is essentially letting Turkey kill the Kurds and bring ISIS back. Because Turkey's a Muslim Brotherhood nation now. And we'll get into that, hopefully sometime in the next weeks, about what exactly Erdogan Turkey has become. But just the fact that they use the phrase Lindsey Graham is a Trump loyalist, but he's going against Trump here, which means he's a Republican. And this goes to the wider point of how the left misrepresents the right on a lot of things. And the number one is probably evangelical Christians that they love to hate. And Edgar Clavin did a very good job of sort of articulating this a couple of weeks ago. But he did a clip, and I thought it was an excellent thing to do to show the left likes to excoriate evangelical Christians for any reason under the sun, even ones that are not related. The moon is getting colder, global moon cooling, that's evangelical Christians' fault. But they like to say, oh, how can evangelical Christians back Trump when he's so against evangelical Christian, and why aren't they going to Bernie Sanders? People never be charitable to Christians and assume that, listen, evangelical Christians will never vote for the least pro-abortion thing they can see. Right? Evangelical Christians believe abortion is murder, and that is a huge issue for them. And they vote for people they don't agree with because they think the policy will do a better moral right. And again, we've seen this happen in Canada, right? This is Trudeau wearing blackface. It's the exact same principle here, right? You're not a racist if you vote for Trudeau because he wore blackface. You can vote for a higher principle. And he basically showed Pat Robertson, who I don't agree with on a lot of things, but he's a very staunch evangelical. Pat Robertson excoriated Trump over the Kurdish thing because this was not within the evangelical values. So believe it or not, conservatives, even evangelical Christians, have values that they vote for. And believe it or not, evangelical Christians do not have extreme left-wing super abortion values. Believe it or not, even evangelical Christians aren't going to pick up their torches and pitchforks and start going whacking fetuses on the head left, right, and center. That's not going to happen. So it's just the way they covered that. It is kind of funny to all of a sudden see the mainstream media pivot to my view on geopolitics within, snap your fingers. And this is the same people that when Trump was bashing Turkey months ago or years ago were saying, Turkey's a NATO ally. Trump is crazy. Why is he saying things about Turkey? Turkey's in NATO. So everyone in the media who's a security expert or all these talking heads, they're all frauds. All of them are frauds. Now, the biggest omission, we're talking about coalitions. So we spent a lot of time talking about coalitions, and a CBC analyst, the conservative person they put on, made a good thing saying the reason we're talking about coalitions because there's no ballot issue in this election. It's not like we're talking about an actual policy, and it's a void. And the reason there's a void is because we don't want to cover all the stories that would hurt the liberals. So the coalition talk is sort of the least damaging stories for the left that we can cover. Blackface, they don't want to keep harping on that. SNC-Lavalin completely shows how horrible and utterly corrupt and totalitarian Trudeau's government is. So we're talking about coalition building, and essentially I do think it kind of favors the Conservative Party, all this talk, because Canada isn't as far left as people think. It's a center-left country, but it's more center than left. And Canadians, if electoral reform were to happen and the NDP and Liberals can get some serious power, you would actually see a right-wing shift in the country to keep from going too far left-wing, because Canada is very centrist and it does sort of value centrality in a lot of ways, the majority of the electorate. Now, the biggest omission is, with all this Jagmeet Singh surging talk, how can no one have asked Jagmeet Singh about his ties to the Khalistani movement? There are multiple videos. I have one on my page about the NDP in the election. At the end, he's at a Khalistani rally where he talks about separating India. There's another film where he's at an event talking with two Sikh Khalistani extremists who call for violence. So he's not like a pacifist Khalistani activist. He has been associated with a violent Khalistani activist. And remember, Khalistani terrorism committed the worst mass murder in Canadian history. The Air India bombing, over 300 people died. 280 of them were Canadians. 280 Canadians were murdered for the Khalistani movement. So the fact that no one has even asked Jagmeet Singh, how it hasn't, I get it, it's not 24-hour news, right? We're polite, we're Canadian. But how no one has asked and no one on the mainstream media has even brought up Jagmeet Singh's ties to radical Khalistanis? I mean, what's the point of even having a media at this point? Why do these things even exist? And now you know why I exist. So that's it for the CBC today. Because I didn't really cover much news, I'm going to give them 6.5 to 7, 6 to 7. Pick whatever you want. On the Rosemary Barton scale, if you really don't like the CBC, give it a 7. If you do, give it a 6. But I'll give it a 6.5 on the Rosemary Barton scale for bias. So that's it. I hope everyone had a nice Thanksgiving. I will see you tomorrow.